Welcome, Laura. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what brought you to integrative health.
Yeah. So my name is Laura Timbrook, and I really work in corporate wellness and really, for the most part, shift work. And, what brought me to integrative health was so much like so many of us, we had a health issue and we looked to fix it. And we kind of went into the whole, well, what's happening with my body? And for me, it was my kids. And it kind of opened this whole new world for me. And because I came from a corporate background, corporate wellness felt the most comfortable. So we did that for a number of years. And then finally, I went into a few manufacturing facilities and I was like, nope, this is where I need to be. So that's really how I fell in love with the shift workforce and really have really been advocating for the shift workforce and their health and well-being.
Yeah, and I'm so excited for this conversation because I truly believe that it's a segment, a big segment of the world that most people don't really think too much about and are maybe a little bit scared to try and work with. So can you tell us a little bit about this actual segment? How big is it? Kind of what are some of the risks that they're facing?
Yeah. So, when we look at our shift workforce, that's about 20 to 25% of the US working our employment rate. When we look at Europe or Australia, they're about 25%, and Asia is a little bit higher. So we're talking about really large portions of our workforce. But when we look at their health and wellness, their risks, they're at the highest across everything from cardiovascular issues, metabolic issues, immune system, fertility, cancer. It all is higher when we're dealing with shift work. And yet, all the health and wellness advice out there is designed for a 9-to-5 lifestyle. Wake up when the sun comes up, go to sleep when it gets dark, eat when the sun is up, reduce your meals when the sun goes down. It's all for that 9-to-5, but 25% of our workforce is just not included in this, yet they're the highest at risk. And actually in 2007, the World Health Organization listed shift work as a probable human carcinogen. So
Wow.
that means our nurses, our doctors, our first responders, the people that get us our Amazon packages, just by them working at night, it's putting them at a higher risk of cancer.
That's insane and scary. And I think we all, maybe don't even recognize the amount of shift workers there are. 20 to 25% is so massive. I think we all think of the nurses in the emergency room, techs, but we don't think about, like you said, the Amazon drivers and how that's really exploding, and the factory workers. And I think you mentioned, on our previous call, something about people who work on boats, right? Is, the security guards at night. This is it's such a huge percentage of the world that people, are, like you said, our healthcare and even integrative health is not really tailored to, if they follow the same sleep and diet recommendations, it's not going to work for them. And I think what you do is so important because just like with working with kids or working with people with very specific needs, a lot of health coaches don't know how to do that. It makes them very uncomfortable because, like you said, the standard way of approaching these things just doesn't work. So it's such a cool niche and industry that you're in that is so needed.
Yeah, it really, when I first got into it, I had no idea. And every time I talk to somebody, I find this new shift work that I didn't even think was really shift work. You were saying boats, and I was just had a podcast on somebody that works on a research vessel. And that's it's just so expansive. And we really don't think about it because so many times we just think of maybe the nurses or the doctors or those working in the hospitals, and we don't look outside, even our entertainment staff, the people in our bars and our nightclubs. And it just, the list goes on.
Yeah. And I think, all of us know how important sleep is. It's one of the core pillars to life and health. And, even if we just miss 1 hour of sleep and we're out of our circadian rhythm, we all feel terrible. So imagine people who are completely backward. And, again, there's so many of them. And what are some of the most common symptoms that you see from shift workers kind of in general?
Yeah. I mean, sleep is a big one. So we're dealing with just always tired, burnt out, run down. A lot of times they're fighting cold after cold. But then we get into more things, digestive issues. I had no idea how many digestive issues that a lot of our shift workers face. And a lot of the times it's just because they're trying to follow standard ways of eating on a non-standard lifestyle, and it just doesn't work. So a lot of times, if it's lunch break and it's 2:00 in the morning and they're eating what might be even a balanced lunch, but 2 a.m. in the morning, your body, because of your circadian rhythm, is not ready to digest a big salad or maybe a Trader Joe's chicken and, cranberry sandwich. So all of a sudden you have digestive issues, and then it's, I must be affected by gluten. I must be affected by this. And no, it's not really that at all. It's just, you can't eat a sandwich at 2:00 in the morning. We have to change how we are timing our meals and how we're nourishing our bodies. It's just all a little bit different.
Yeah. And, I think we all know, because this is a big part of the IHP and health coaching, is that, your cortisol spikes through, in the morning, and it's supposed to be on a very specific rhythm, and different times of night, your liver is, going through detox. And so like, if you're missing all those core components and your systems aren't able to detox, they're not able to kind of calm the nervous system, then you have to have some very specific techniques for helping yourself to get back into that rhythm. And like you said, even the metabolism and even weight gain. Do you see weight gain as being a problem?
Absolutely. And, this was a hard one for me, because when I first started in a manufacturing facility, the weight of the workforce was significantly higher. And that was one of the reasons why they were calling us in. They kind of wanted to help their employees lose weight. One of the things, I went in there and I had this preconceived notion that, it's the grease trucks. This is why they're gaining weight. They're just eating bad food. And when I quickly realized I was so wrong, because they weren't eating. And a lot of times I would sit down with these men and they would tell me, does it look like I need to lose weight? Does it look like I need to eat? And I was like, well, that's not a healthy mindset. Like, everybody needs to eat. But they had this mindset that many of us have, is that, because we might carry some extra weight, we don't need to eat. And I really found that it wasn't necessarily always what they were eating. It's just everything was thrown off. Sleep was thrown off. Food was thrown off. And once we could start getting our bodies in better alignment, weight was naturally reducing without really doing much at all.
That's so fascinating that, people are maybe skipping more meals. And, I wonder like how the hunger pangs happen, and if they hydrate, do they stay pretty hydrated, or is that also something you see?
It's interesting, because hydration for some of them, it depends on where they're working. In this one facility, it was a factory. So hydration was really big, because the humidity, it was a paper recycling plant. Mm-hmm. So humidity was really big thing. So hydration was huge. So they were hydrated. But what it came down to a lot of times when it came to food, it was limited time for them to get it. I had one guy that sat in front of me and he had like limited mobility. He was in his 60s and worked in the factory his whole life. I think he said he was like 14 when he started working in the factory. And he had 9-hole boots. So if you ever have steel-toed 9-hole boots, they are a pain in the neck to get on and off. And that's somebody without a mobility problem. Mm-hmm. So this gentleman, in order for him to go to lunch, he had to remove his coveralls that required removing his boots, putting them back on, walking across campus, eating, and then doing it all again to get back on the floor. He had a 30-minute lunch break. It was physically impossible for him to eat and get all that done. So, this was a lot of what we're seeing, is that, the logistics in all of this just doesn't line up.
Wow, that's really interesting to think about as well. Yeah, I guess depends on what industry they're in, but yeah, very limited time, limited options, I guess. Do you see light as being an issue? Because, obviously we talk a lot about blue light and LED lights and how damaging those are for your REM and, sleep cycles. Like, do you see that as being a big issue? And do you kind of recommend people wear, blue light blocking or light blocking glasses?
Absolutely. It was funny. A couple of years ago on my podcast, I did some research on blue light blockers. And honestly, I thought it was a hoax. I thought it was snake oil. I was like, this isn't real. I did the research. I did the podcast episode, and it proved me so wrong in my research. And I started relaying that to the shift work I was doing, and it was drastic. Getting those daylight lamps in, controlling the light in the morning and at night, it made such a huge issue. But when we talk about light, a lot of times we're always focusing on daylight because that's the best, out in the morning, getting daylight. Now, if somebody they wake up at 5 p.m., they're a night shifter. In the winter, 5 p.m., it's already dark. They don't have the access to get to light. So when we start talking about that, we really want to start talking about the use of those daylight lamps, daylight alarm clocks, things like that, stuff that's feasible for them. But then on the backside of that, like you were saying, be careful of that light when we're trying to go to sleep. So amber glasses are great. Red if you're doing, public transit home, do not wear red light glasses trying to drive a car. But things like that, it does make a huge difference. And even, I like to say when we think about babies, when we go to put a baby down for a nap, the lights are dim, the sounds in the house are limited. But when we're night shifters going to bed first thing in the morning, it's bright outside, the house is loud, lawnmowers are running, and then we're trying to go to sleep and we're wondering why we're tossing and turning for 3-4 hours and we're not getting any sleep. We have to set up an environment that's conducive to sleep. And like I had a guy tell me one time, he goes, bedrooms are made for nighttime sleepers, not night shifters.
That's interesting. Wow. Yeah. So it sounds like some of the biggest pillars that you help people with are obviously the sleep and the timing and meals and timing. Are there any other really big pillars that you find to be the most important?
Yeah. So exercise is a big one because depending on what the shift worker does for a living is going to kind of depend on what exercise is going to look like. We're a nurse. We're running all over the place. We probably don't need to go to the gym and do a big cardio workout. We just have been running, a lot of my nurses have 25,000 steps a day, but we need something more calming for them. But now if we're at a security bank and we're sitting in a chair all day, that's the one we're going to need movement on. So their workouts are different. But the next thing, and the one thing that actually surprised me when I was working with this population was our social connection. When we're day walkers, that's what they call those that live a 9-to-5 lifestyle. When we're a day
I love that, day walkers. That sounds so like, I don't know what the TV show is, but yeah.
Exactly. When we're a day walker, we go to dinner with our friends. We might have brunch with them on a Sunday. When you're a night shifter or a second shifter or even rotating shifters, you don't get that opportunity. So friends, family, they fall to the wayside. Communication breaks down. So there is such a big social connection aspect. And I was never expecting that when I started working with this population. So we do a lot with sleep, a lot with meal timing, exercise. But I say the second next to sleep is we're dealing with social connections, because if we can get good social connections, a lot of times the other two fall into place.
Yeah. And I feel like it would also kind of reduce the stress level, just because obviously stress is probably through the roof, different types of stressors, there's hundreds of them, but like certain stressors are just through the roof. And so, the stress management, that the connective side of that, and just feeling like you're able to have those types of connections, whether it is with family, friends, is going to be so important. But do you work in a lot of stress management as well?
Yeah. So stress management, it's kind of interesting with stress management, because in corporate wellness, we would do a lot with, meditative approaches. You do that with a bunch of diesel mechanics, you're going to be shushed outside the room, because there is one guy told me, he's like, I'm not into twinkle mats and yoga lights. I mean, let's reverse that, twinkle lights and yoga mats. And, and I think that's what a lot of them are thinking, that these stress management techniques are often, we kind of call soft. And a lot of times our shift workers, they're pretty gritty people. So when we have a soft practice, it doesn't relate to them. So what we do with a lot of times when it comes to stress management, we're looking at things like fishing. It follows all the same things we focus on in our meditative practice: deep breathing, focusing on the noises around you. It's funny. I work with a group of diesel mechanics, and we deal with fishing a lot. I said, okay, what's the first thing you do when you step up to a creek? You're ready to cast your line. Now, a bunch of them will joke, I crack open a beer. But then the next thing they do, they all naturally take in a big, deep breath. You relax, you unwind, you're listening to the birds and looking at the fish and smelling the forest. And that's everything we talk about being mindful. And they already do it. So we do a lot with fishing, motorcycle rides, classic cars, hiking, sitting in a hunting stand, all of these, because they all incorporate everything we talk about in meditative and mindfulness practices, but they already do it naturally.
That's so cool. Just like the fishing and how you tie all that in, because so many people, when they think of stress relief, it is the meditation, it is those types of things, but it really depends on the population you're working with. And, for me, when I was going through a lot of stress and my cortisol was all out of whack and my sleep was, weird and crazy, I went to supplementation to help as well. Mm-hmm. Do you work a lot with people on supplementation, for instance, like nervous system, supports that help you kind of reset the circadian rhythm? Because is that going to cause more strange imbalance with this population?
Yeah. So for me personally, I don't. So a lot of times we might touch on supplements, and it's always talk to your doctor, talk to your healthcare provider if this is something. But a lot of times we don't. We work more on those behaviors, because in this population, a lot of them are already, they're not going to take a supplement. They don't want to do anything extra. So we're trying to work on things that they already do. But there are times, a lot of our nurses, sleep is huge for our nurses. So they might be looking at a sleep type supplement. Magnesium is a big one that a lot of them use because some of them are concerned with the use of melatonin. So magnesium is a big one. Maybe we're doing some lemon balm and things like that, but that's always kind of in conjunction with their practitioner. We kind of really are more on the behavior end.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it makes sense with all the things you've talked about. And one thing that randomly popped into my head is like, how do they deal with weekends or days off? Do they try and keep the same schedule?
So this is where there's a lot of frustration when it comes to them trying to understand what to do on the weekend. So if you look at a lot of the health and wellness advice, we're going to talk about sleep for a moment. They tell you keep the same schedule. Well, for our rotating shift workers, that's completely impossible. Some days are days, some days are nights, some days second. Who knows what your schedule is going to look like? But what we do try to do is we try, as if we know the person's on night shift all the time, that's just the shift they work. We do try to keep the weekend as close to it as possible. However, we need to take into account that social aspect. Soccer games are a big one. Sports are a big one. These men and women want to be with their kids for sports. So to say, no, just keep the same sleep schedule, there is no way they're going to do it because Johnny's soccer game is too important to them. So a lot of times we start practicing, okay, what do we have control over? Well, it's that routine. Let's at least keep the same bedtime routine. Let's try not to change it as much as possible, but keeping within the realm. But a lot of it, it's difficult. I mean, it's never going to be perfect. And you just kind of got to do the best you can for some things like that.
Yeah. And I feel like there's a lot of napping happening, hopefully.
Oh my goodness. Naps are a lifesaver. So one of the things I've worked with and I've learned through a lot of my nurses is caffeine naps, which is really powerful. So we all think of caffeine as stopping us from going to sleep. Well, there is a technique called caffeine naps where you take, I think it's like 1 or 2 ounces of coffee. So I think essentially you want about 200 milligrams of caffeine. So it's probably a little bit more than that. You want about 200 milligrams of caffeine right before going to sleep. So we don't want to have like a cup of coffee over the next half hour to go to bed, because by then caffeine's in our system and we're awake. Right before we go to sleep, get that 200 milligrams of caffeine. That's going to fight off the sleep inertia. So that's when we wake up and we're groggy. So now we can sleep a 30, 45-minute nap. And we combat the sleep inertia, because a lot of times what we're telling nurses and those that nap, keep it about 15 minutes because then you're going to be too groggy waking up. Well, we can do it a little bit better and we get a little creative. And then there's other tips like putting our hands in ice water and splashing her face when we wake up. So there's all these cool little techniques. But yeah, I mean, it's when we're talking about stuff like that, it's difficult. You have to find, ways around it.
Yeah, that's funny. I had a boyfriend when I was like 18 who was already doing that. He was a professional athlete and he was doing the caffeine naps. And I, at the time, thought he was crazy, but it totally worked. And that's such an interesting one. So caffeine, that's a really interesting topic. Do people kind of mainline caffeine? Is that pretty common?
Well, yes, mainlining caffeine is very common for night shifters and second shifters, and even for our day shifters. Think about, myself, 3 p.m. It's like, ooh, a nice cup of coffee would sound good right about now. So what we need to do is kind of change their mindset on coffee, right? And realize that, okay, if you're a night shifter, you're tired at 2 a.m., what's going on? Have you been really bored all night and now you're just looking for something to pick me up? Well, maybe we can use a fruit juice, something that gives us a little sugar, a little pep in our step, but it's not going to affect our sleep. Mm-hmm. Is it because we're hungry? Did we not eat enough? We kind of like to get 2 big meals in before shifts. So did we not eat enough? So it's really kind of learning. But yeah, caffeine is a big one, and really kind of seeing where they are on caffeine, because caffeine has been so heavily utilized and it's almost like built into the culture. But once they start realizing the effects it has on their sleep, I have found so many people, once they start getting better sleep and they start feeling what it's like to get better sleep, they're more likely to back off the caffeine, especially since we're telling them it's not that you can't have it, have your caffeine, just not at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah. And the other thing I just wanted to ask about is we know that your blood sugar is higher at night than it is in the morning, even for the same meal. So is blood sugar regulation a big issue?
So it is for those that are diabetic. So the ones that it's not diabetic for and they're not having hunger issues and stuff like that, we kind of don't even mention it. It's too much information for them. But for the ones that are diabetic, we kind of get them to be a little bit more conscious of it. Have you noticed certain foods, your blood sugar is spiking? Everyone now has the continuous monitors, especially for those that already have blood sugar issues. So a lot of them are already seeing the spikes. And a lot of times it's like, I don't know what to do about it. Like, how do I combat that? And a lot of times it's getting the right meals earlier in their day, right? And then protein. So if you're getting hungry, let's not reach for something sweet and sugary. Maybe let's do some kind of protein. Or for some of our people, which is kind of crazy, when they have a fruit juice with a protein, their blood sugar doesn't spike as bad as when they have caffeine. So It's kind of interesting to see, but everybody's unique and it's kind of allowing them to monitor themselves.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. And this has been so helpful. So if there's one thing that you could put out to the entire world, if we reached 1 million people, what would that message be?
Oh my goodness. Really start, understanding the life of a shift worker and how, as practitioners, health and wellness coaches, we can better support them in their health and wellness. And, if they're kind of interested and they want to know a little bit more about kind of some of the tips and things that we go through, they can actually go to my website, lauratimbrook.com/night shift, one word, and they can download Coaching the Night Shift Guide that kind of gives them an understanding of sleep and how we can better coach them on that.
Okay. No, that's so helpful. And yeah, because this was such a powerful episode. And I'm so excited for every health coach to listen to this because I think it's so needed. So you've got your website, or do you have any Instagram handles or anything you'd like to put out there?
Yeah. So anywhere you go, just look up Laura Timbrook and it'll pop me in. And really, it's about just understanding them and just really embracing them and building a better community for them to thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you so much for coming on. And I know this was invaluable for our community. And, definitely reach out and go to her website if you want to learn more about how to support this community. And I hope it just encourages everyone to kind of dive deeper into this really large segment of our population. And again, thank you everyone for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe. We've got lots more cool episodes coming up. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.